Nathan Whitaker had buried his boy 3 winters past, yet the ghost still called his name through every howling wind that swept across the Colorado Territory. The November storm struck without mercy, painting the ranch house windows white with ice and fury. Nathan pressed his weathered palm against the frosted glass, watching his cattle huddle beneath the skeletal cottonwoods. At 42, he'd learned that nature gave no quarter, not to man, beast, or memory. The wind shrieked like a banshee around the eaves, and for a moment, he could swear he heard 10-year-old Leo's laughter dancing through the gale. "Stop it," he commanded himself, turning from the window. "The boy's gone. Let him rest." But the dead, Nathan had discovered, rarely stayed buried in this lonesome country. The knock came at midnight. 3 sharp raps that cut through the storm's symphony like gunshots. Nathan's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 on his hip as he approached the door. Visitors at this hour meant trouble, and trouble in the territory usually wore spurs and carried lead. "Who's there?" His voice carried the authority of a man who'd fought Apaches and outlaws both. Silence. Then, barely audible above the wind, "Please. I'm so cold." A woman's voice. Young. Desperate. Nathan lifted the heavy wooden bar and cracked the door. The storm immediately tried to tear it from his grasp, but what he saw on the threshold made him forget the bitter cold entirely. She couldn't have been more than 18, with auburn hair plastered to her skull and lips blue as winter violets. Her dress, if the tattered remnants could be called that, hung in shreds around her trembling frame. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes like fallen stars, and her bare feet were purple with frostbite. "Sweet Jesus," Nathan breathed, yanking the door wide. "Get in here, girl. Quickly now." She stumbled across the threshold and collapsed against the doorframe, her breath coming in short, crystalline puffs. Nathan caught her before she could fall, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through his chest. She weighed no more than a whisper, all sharp angles and desperate need. "There's a fire in the hearth," he said, guiding her toward the stone fireplace that dominated the main room. "We need to get you warm before, Leo," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Leo Whitaker. Nathan's world tilted. The name hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. His hands, still supporting her trembling form, began to shake. "What did you say?" She lifted her head, and for the first time, he saw her eyes, deep green as creek water, filled with knowledge that no 18-year-old should possess. "Your son, Leo. He sent me to you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Nathan's rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that grief had finally claimed his sanity. But the girl's eyes held no madness, only a terrible, profound certainty. "My son is dead." The words tasted like ash on his tongue. "Has been. These 3 years. I know." She reached up with one frostbitten hand and touched his cheek. Her skin was ice, but her touch burned like a brand. "That's why I'm here." Nathan stepped back, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. The familiar weight of the Colt provided cold comfort against this impossibility. "Who are you? What kind of game?" "My name is Ruby Vaughn." She swayed on her feet, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "And I'm not playing any game, Mr. Whitaker. Your boy, he's been trying to reach you. Through me. Every night for 3 months now." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows that seemed to take on familiar shapes. A boy's silhouette, a wooden horse, memories that refused to stay buried. Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury, as if the very elements were responding to the impossible conversation unfolding within these walls. You could almost taste the electricity in the air, thick as summer honey. Nathan studied her face with the intensity of a man reading his own death warrant, searching for signs of deception, madness, or worse. But all he found was exhaustion deeper than any physical weariness, desperation that spoke of journeys beyond measure, and something else, a bone-deep sadness that mirrored his own like a reflection in still water. "You're talking about communing with the dead," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "That's witchcraft talk, girl. Dangerous words in these parts." Ruby's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You think I chose this? You think I wanted to be haunted by a boy I never met, driven across half the territory by dreams that feel more real than waking?" She gestured at her torn dress, her frostbitten skin. Look at me, Mr. Whitaker. Do I look like someone who's benefiting from this gift? The word hung between them like a challenge. Nathan had heard whispers of such things, women who claimed to speak with spirits, men who saw visions in the desert. Most were charlatans or mad. But Ruby Vaughn carried herself with the weary dignity of someone bearing an unwanted burden, not the theatrical flair of a confidence artist. How do you know his name? He asked quietly. Ruby's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees beside the fireplace, her torn skirts pooling around her like spilled wine. The heat from the flames began to bring painful life back to her frozen limbs. He comes to me in dreams. Has been for months now. Always the same message, spoken in that sweet voice of his. Tell my pa I'm sorry. Tell him it wasn't his fault. Tell him the fever took me, not his failings. Nathan's vision blurred. Tears he'd refused to shed for 3 years threatening to spill. The night Leo died rushed back like a flood, the boy's fever climbing despite all Nathan's desperate efforts. The doctor's useless remedies and pitying looks, the way Nathan had failed to save his only child. The guilt that had eaten him alive for 3 years. The whiskey that couldn't drown the voices whispering you should have done more. You should have tried harder. You should have been a better father. He'd replayed that night 1,000 times. Wondering if he'd acted sooner, ridden harder for the doctor, stayed by Leo's bedside instead of pacing the kitchen like a caged wolf. The what-ifs had become his constant companions, more faithful than any friend. That's impossible, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. His hands trembled as he reached for his whiskey bottle, then stopped. The amber liquid had been his refuge for too long. Ruby began to shiver violently, her teeth chattering like castanets in the mountain wind. He told me about the wooden horse. The one with the broken wheel. Said you carved it for his 7th birthday, but he never got to finish painting it because he took sick the next week. Nathan's voice was hollow, stunned. No one knew about that horse. He'd burned it after the funeral, unable to bear the sight of Leo's unfinished handiwork. The bright red paint on the mane, the careful blue strokes on the saddle blanket, the way the boy's tongue had poked out. In concentration as he worked, Ruby nodded, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield against the cold. He said you'd need proof. Said you were stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips, transforming her face from merely pretty to something approaching beautiful. His words, not mine, Mr. Whitaker. Nathan sank into the chair across from her, his mind reeling like a Mustang with a burr under its saddle. Either this girl was the most skilled confidence artist he'd ever encountered, or something impossible was happening in his home tonight. Something that defied every rational thought he'd ever held, every belief he'd clung to in the long nights. Since Leo's passing. Where did you come from? He asked. How did you get here? I've been traveling for weeks. Following the dreams. They led me here, to you. She gestured weakly at her torn dress. I lost my horse 2 days back. Been walking. Ever since. Walking? In the storm? Girl, you should be dead. Ruby's green eyes met his, and in them, Nathan saw a truth that chilled him more than the winter wind. The depth of knowledge there, the weight of secrets carried by shoulders too young to bear them. Maybe I am. Maybe we both are, and this is just another kind of purgatory. A place where the living and the dead meet to settle accounts. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny prayers ascending to heaven. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but inside the ranch house, time seemed suspended between heartbeats. The very air felt charged, electric with possibility and dread. Nathan reached for his whiskey bottle, then stopped. He'd been drowning in that bottle for 3 years, and tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the first step toward something he'd thought impossible since that terrible fever-racked night when Leo had slipped away despite all his father's desperate prayers. But what? Redemption? Or damnation? In this harsh territory, he'd learned the hard way that the two often walked hand in hand. Tell me, he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Tell me what else he said. Ruby looked into the flames, her face taking on an otherworldly quality in the flickering light. He said you blame yourself for everything. For his mother's death and childbirth, for not being able to save him, for not being the man you thought you should be. Her voice softened. He said you've been living like a ghost yourself, haunting this ranch instead of living on it. Nathan's breath caught. Those were thoughts he'd never spoken aloud, not even to the bottle that had become his most faithful companion. Guilt he'd carried like stones in his pockets, weighing him down with every step. And he said, Ruby continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, that you needed to know he's not suffering, that he's with his mama now, and they're both waiting for you to start living again. The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He doubled over, a sound halfway between a sob and a roar tearing from his throat. 3 years of buried grief, of guilt and self-recrimination, came pouring out like water from a broken dam. Ruby rose unsteadily and moved to his side, her small hand coming to rest on his shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know this is hard, but he made me promise to tell you. He said you'd been carrying this burden long enough. Nathan looked up at her through eyes blurred with tears he'd refused to shed for 3 long years. Why? You? Why would he come to a stranger? I don't know. Ruby's voice was barely audible. I've been asking myself that question for months. Maybe because I understand loss. Maybe because I had nothing left to lose by believing in something impossible. The storm outside seemed to be weakening, its fury spent against the sturdy walls of the ranch house. But inside, Nathan felt as if a different kind of storm was just beginning, one that might finally wash away the guilt and grief that had held him prisoner for so long. But as Ruby began to speak again, her voice carrying impossible knowledge of his dead son's final moments, Nathan realized that in this harsh territory, the line between salvation and destruction was often thinner than a razor's edge. Nathan stared at Ruby Vaughn as if she were a mirage that might vanish with the dawn, leaving him alone with his ghosts once more. The firelight painted her face in shades of gold and shadow, and for a moment, he could almost believe she was ethereal, a spirit sent to torment or heal him. He couldn't yet tell which. You're exhausted, he said finally, his voice hoarse from the tears he'd shed, and half frozen. We need to get you proper clothing before you catch your death. Ruby's laugh was soft but bitter. Might be a mercy at this point. I've been running from one nightmare into another for weeks now. Nathan stood and moved to the wooden trunk beside the fireplace, his movements careful as a man walking through a minefield. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, lay the dress his wife Sarah had worn to church, a simple blue wool that had brought out the color of her eyes. He'd kept it all these years, unable to part with the last tangible piece of her presence. This belonged to my wife, he said quietly, lifting the dress. She was about your size. It'll keep you warm. Ruby's fingers traced the fabric with reverence. It's beautiful, but I couldn't. She would have wanted it used. Nathan's voice caught. Sarah never could stand to see a soul in need, especially a young woman far from home. As Ruby disappeared behind the carved wooden screen to change, Nathan poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot that perpetually simmered on the stove. His hands shook slightly as he lifted it to his lips, the bitter brew doing little to steady his nerves. Mr. Whitaker, Ruby's voice drifted from behind the screen. Leo, he told me about her too. You're Sarah. Nathan's cup froze halfway to his lips. What about her? He said she used to sing while she worked. Something about a mockingbird and a diamond ring. Ruby's voice was soft, almost musical. He said it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Nathan's eyes closed as the memory washed over him. Sarah humming that old lullaby while she kneaded bread, her voice sweet as honey in summer. Leo had been barely 5 then, always underfoot in the kitchen, trying to help with small, clumsy hands. He remembers that? Nathan whispered. He remembers everything. The way she smelled like lavender and flower. How she'd kiss his forehead when he had nightmares. How she'd make pancakes in the shape of animals on Sunday mornings. Ruby emerged from behind the screen, transformed by the simple blue dress. He said she's been taking care of him, wherever they are. Nathan's chest tightened. For 3 years, he'd tortured himself with questions about the afterlife, about whether Leo was alone, afraid, waiting for a father who might never come. To hear that Sarah, his beloved Sarah, was with their boy brought a peace he'd thought impossible. You look. Nathan paused, studying her. In Sarah's dress, Ruby seemed older somehow, more grounded. Beautiful in a way that made his pulse quicken unexpectedly. You look like you belong here. Ruby's cheeks flushed. I don't belong anywhere, Mr. Whitaker. Haven't for a long time. What happened to you? Before the dream started, Nathan gestured to the chair across from his. You didn't just appear out of thin air. Ruby settled into the chair, tucking her feet beneath her like a cat seeking warmth. I was raised by my grandmother in a little town called Mercy Creek, about 200 miles south of here. She had the sight, people called it, could see things others couldn't. When she died last spring, I thought I was free of all that strangeness. Nathan leaned forward, drawn by the pain in her voice. But you weren't. The dream started a week after her funeral. At first, I thought it was grief playing tricks on my mind. But they kept getting stronger, more real. Leo would show me things, this ranch, your face, details about his life that I couldn't possibly know. Ruby's hands twisted in her lap. People in town started talking, called me cursed, said I was consorting with the devil. Is that why you left? Ruby's laugh was hollow. I was driven out. The preacher convinced half the town I was a witch. They burned my grandmother's house with me inside it. Nearly killed me. She pulled down the neckline of the dress slightly, revealing an angry red scar across her collarbone. I barely escaped with my life. Nathan's jaw tightened. He'd seen mob justice before, had watched good people turned into monsters by fear and superstition. I'm sorry. No one should have to endure that. I've been wandering ever since, following the dreams. They led me north, always north, towards something I couldn't name. Until tonight. Ruby looked up at him with those impossibly green eyes. Until I found you. Nathan felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. This girl, this woman, had risked everything to bring him a message from his dead son. She'd walked through fire and ice to reach him, carrying nothing but faith and an impossible story. Ruby, he said softly, testing her name on his tongue. That's a precious stone, rare and beautiful. She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. My grandmother used to say I was her little Ruby, bright as blood and twice as fierce. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She taught me that some gifts are burdens and some burdens are gifts. I'm still trying to figure out which this is. Nathan stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the storm that was finally beginning to abate. In the distance, he could see the first faint traces of dawn painting the eastern sky. Stay, he said without turning around. At least until you've rested. Until you've decided what comes next. I couldn't impose. You wouldn't be imposing. Nathan turned back to her, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. This ranch has been too quiet for too long. Maybe it's time for that to change. Ruby studied his face, searching for something he couldn't name. You believe me. About Leo. About the dreams. I want to believe you. Nathan's honesty surprised him. Maybe that's enough for now. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Outside, the storm's fury was spent, leaving only the gentle whisper of wind through the eaves and the distant lowing of cattle grateful for the dawn. There's something else, Ruby said quietly. Something Leo made me promise to tell you. Nathan's blood chilled. What? He said there's danger coming. Not just to you, but to anyone who tries to help you. He said a man named Asher Holden is riding this way, and he's not coming with good intentions. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his gun. Asher Holden, the name was a curse in these parts. A man who collected debts with lead and took what he wanted with violence. Nathan had heard whispers that Holden had his eye on the Whitaker Ranch, coveting the water rights and prime grazing land. How could Leo know about Holden? Nathan asked, though part of him already knew the answer. That Ruby's voice was barely above a whisper. The dead see things differently than the living. They see the threads that connect all things, the patterns that lead to joy or sorrow. She stood and moved to the window, her silhouette framed by the growing light. He said Holden will arrive with the next storm. And when he does, everything will change. Nathan felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat, wondering if Ruby Vaughn had brought him salvation or the promise of a war he wasn't sure he could win. The dawn brought with it a crystalline silence that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that would surely come. Nathan stood in his kitchen, watching Ruby move about with the easy grace of someone who belonged there. She'd insisted on making breakfast, and now the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits filled the air like a promise of better times. You don't have to do this, Nathan said, leaning against the doorframe. You're a guest, not hired help. Ruby glanced over her shoulder, flour dusting her cheek. My grandmother always said idle hands are the devil's workshop. Besides, I need to keep busy, or I'll start thinking too much. About what? About whether I'm losing my mind. About whether any of this is real. She turned the bacon with practiced ease. About what happens when Asher Holden arrives. Nathan's jaw tightened at the mention of that name. He'd spent the pre-dawn hours cleaning his weapons and checking the ranch's defenses, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Holden traveled with a crew of gunmen who'd kill a man for the price of a drink. Tell me about him, Ruby said softly. About Holden. Nathan poured himself coffee from the pot, the bitter brew doing little to wash away the taste of dread. He's what happens when evil finds a way to prosper. Started as a cattle rustler, worked his way up to extortion and murder. Now he fancies himself a land baron, taking what he wants from folks who can't fight back. And he wants your ranch. The water rights, mainly. This land sits on the sweetest spring water in the territory. Control that, and you control every ranch for 50 miles. Nathan's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. He's been circling like a vulture for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ruby set a plate of food before him, her fingers brushing his as she pulled away. The contact sent electricity through his arm, and he found himself studying her face with new intensity. In the morning light, she looked younger, more vulnerable, yet there was steel in her spine that spoke of inner strength. Leo said you'd fight, she said quietly. But he also said you'd try to face it alone. I've been alone for 3 years. I'm used to it. Being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing, Nathan. The use of his first name sent warmth through his chest. Is that what Leo told you? No. That's what I see when I look at you. Ruby sat across from him, her own plate untouched. You've been living like a dead man, going through the motions without really living. But when you look at me, she paused, color rising in her cheeks. When you look at me, I see something wake up in your eyes. Nathan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Ruby, I know it's crazy. I know I've only been here one night. But I feel it too. This pull between us, like we're meant to find each other. She looked down at her hands. Maybe that's why Leo chose me. Maybe he knew his father needed more than just a message from beyond. The honesty in her voice made Nathan's chest tight. He'd felt it too. This inexplicable connection, as if she'd been carved from the missing piece of his soul. But admitting, it felt like betraying Sarah's memory, like forgetting the woman who'd given him the only true happiness he'd ever known. My wife, he began, is dead, Ruby said gently. And Leo said she'd want you to be happy, that she'd want you to live again, not just exist. Nathan pushed back from the table, suddenly restless. It's not that simple. A man doesn't just forget. 15 years of marriage. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to remember what it feels like to hope for something more than just making it through another day. Before Nathan could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the morning air. He moved to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. 3 riders were approaching from the east, their horses lathered with sweat as if they'd been riding hard through the night. It's Luna McCoy, Nathan said, recognizing the lead rider. She owns the spread north of here. Something's wrong. Nathan stepped onto the porch as Luna reined in her horse, her face pale beneath her wide-brimmed hat. She was a handsome woman in her 30s, tough as leather and twice as smart, who'd been running her ranch single-handed since her husband's death 2 years prior. Nathan, she called out, swinging down from her saddle. Thank God you're alive. I wasn't sure we'd make it in time. In time for what? Holden's coming. He hit my place last night, burned out my foreman and half my hands. Said anyone who helps me or stands with me will get the same treatment. Luna's eyes were hard as flint. He's gathering men, Nathan, more than I've ever seen him ride with. Word is he's making his move on all the smaller ranches, starting with yours. Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. How many men? 20, maybe more. And they're not just drifters looking for quick pay. These are killers, Nathan. Professional. Gunmen from as far away as Texas and New Mexico. Behind him, Nathan heard Ruby's sharp intake of breath. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her face white as snow. When? Nathan asked. Tonight. Maybe sooner if the weather holds. Luna's gaze shifted to Ruby, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Who's this? Ruby Vaughn, Nathan said. She's a friend. Traveling through. Luna's expression softened slightly. Miss Vaughn, I'm sorry you've gotten mixed up in this. But if you have anywhere else to go, I'd suggest you head there now. This place is about to become a battlefield. Ruby stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I'm not going anywhere. Ruby, Nathan began. No. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. Leo told me this would happen. He told me you'd need help, and that help would come from unexpected places. I'm not running. Luna looked between them, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Well, I'll be damned. Nathan Whitaker's finally found himself a woman with some backbone. Nathan felt heat rise in his cheeks. It's not like that. The hell it isn't, Luna said with a laugh. I can see it in both your faces. Good for you. Nathan. Sarah would have approved. The mention of his wife's name made Nathan's chest tighten, but to his surprise, the pain was less sharp than before. Instead, he felt something that might have been Sarah's blessing, as if his beloved wife was somehow nodding her approval from beyond the grave. What's the plan? Nathan asked, forcing himself to focus on the immediate danger. We gather everyone we can. The Shepherds, the Barretts, maybe some of the hands from the other ranches make a stand here where we have good cover and clear fields of fire. Luna's eyes hardened. Holden's been getting away with this because he picks off isolated ranchers one at a time. But if we stand together, we might actually have a chance, Nathan finished. Ruby moved to his side, her hand finding his. Leo said something else. He said to look for the woman with the moon in her name when the darkness comes. She'll be the key to everything. Luna's eyebrows rose. Moon in her name? My name's Luna. That's moon in Latin. Nathan felt the pieces of some cosmic puzzle clicking into place. How could Leo know about you? Ruby's grip on his hand tightened. The Dead Sea connections we can't. Threads that bind people together across time and space. He said Luna would help us find the others we need. Others? Luna asked. The ones who'll stand with us when the final battle comes. Ruby's voice took on an otherworldly quality. He said there would be seven souls bound, together by fate and choice, ready to fight for something bigger than themselves. Nathan stared at her, wondering if he was falling in love with a prophet or a madwoman. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky and the sound of distant thunder began to rumble across the plains, Nathan realized that in this harsh land where the impossible happened daily, the difference between the two might be smaller than he'd ever imagined. By midday, the Whitaker Ranch had transformed from a lonely outpost into a fortress of desperate hope. The 7 souls Ruby had prophesied began arriving one by one, drawn by Luna's urgent messages and something deeper, a pull they couldn't explain but dared not ignore. Lincoln Barrett arrived first, his weathered face grim beneath his black hat. The aging sheriff had lost his badge years ago to politics and corruption, but his sense of justice burned as bright as ever. Behind him rode Camila Donovan, a fiery Mexican woman whose late husband had been murdered by Holden's men for refusing to sell his land. Figured it was time somebody made a stand, Lincoln said, dismounting stiffly. His arthritis made every movement painful, but his gun hand remained steady as a rock. That bastard Holden's been poisoning this territory long enough. Camila's dark eyes flashed with barely contained rage. He killed my Miguel. Said my land would look better with American blood in the soil. Her hand rested on the ivory-handled pistol at her hip. Today, we make him pay. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the final 3 arrived together. Ellie Shepard, barely 16 but deadly with a rifle after years of defending her family's homestead, and 2 brothers, Vaughn and Asher Madison, who'd ridden hard from the Northern Territories after receiving Luna's message. Nathan studied the group assembled in his main room. 7 people, just as Ruby had predicted. Old and young, male and female, bound together by loss and the desperate need to stand against evil. You could smell the fear beneath their determination, taste the electricity of impending violence in the air. This is madness, Vaughn Madison said, his voice tight with tension. 20 professional gunmen against 7 of us? We're walking into a slaughter. Maybe, Nathan replied. But sometimes a man has to choose between dying on his feet or living on his knees. Ruby moved through the group like a spirit, offering coffee and words of comfort. Nathan watched her with growing amazement. Despite her youth and the terror she must be feeling, she carried herself with quiet strength, becoming the heart around which their desperate alliance formed. She's special, that one, Luna murmured, appearing at Nathan's side. There's power. In her. Old power. I know, Nathan said quietly. I just don't understand it. Some things don't need understanding. Only accepting. Luna's eyes were knowing. You love her. It wasn't a question. Nathan felt the truth of it settle in his chest like a weight and a liberation all at once. Is it that obvious? To everyone. But you, apparently. Luna smiled. Sarah would have liked her. They have the same fire in their eyes, the same willingness to fight for what matters. Before Nathan could respond, Ruby's voice cut across the room, sharp with urgency. They're coming. Everyone froze. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose against the horizon like a brown stain against the blue sky. Nathan grabbed his spyglass and trained it on the approaching riders. 23 men, he reported grimly. All armed. Holden's riding point. Even through the spyglass, Asher Holden was unmistakable, a giant of a man with silver hair and cold eyes that had watched too many men die. He rode his black stallion like a king surveying his domain, confident in his power and certain of his victory. Positions, Nathan commanded. Remember what we discussed. Let them get close before we open fire. Make every shot count. The group scattered to their assigned positions. Lincoln and Vaughn on the roof, Camila and Luna at the windows, Ellie in the loft with her rifle. The Madison brother took the back door, ready to prevent any flanking maneuvers. Ruby remained in the main room with Nathan, her face pale but resolute. Leo's with us, she said quietly. I can feel him. He says to tell you he's proud of his. Pa. Nathan's throat tightened. Ruby, if this goes bad, it won't. She moved close to him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. I've seen how this ends. Not all of us will walk away, but enough will. And you? She smiled through tears that threatened to spill. You'll live to see tomorrow. To build something new on this land. How can you be so sure? Because Leo showed me. In my dreams last night. He showed me an image. This ranch, years from now. Children playing in the yard. A woman with auburn hair hanging wash on the line. A man with kind eyes watching it all from the porch. Her voice softened. A family, Nathan. A real family. Nathan felt his heart stop. Ruby. The thunder of hoofbeats cut off his words. Holden's army had arrived. Through the window, Nathan watched the gunmen spread out in a wide semicircle, their weapons gleaming in the afternoon sun. Holden himself rode to the front, his voice carrying across the yard with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Nathan Whitaker, he called out. I know you're in there. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Sign over your water rights, and you and your friends can ride out of here alive. Nathan stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually in his hands. That's a generous offer, Holden. But I've got a counterproposal. You and your boys turn around and ride out, and I won't put bullets in your yellow bellies. Holden's laugh was like gravel in a tin cup. Still got some fight in you, I see. That's good. Makes it more interesting. His eyes found Ruby, who had appeared in the doorway behind Nathan. Who's the girl? New wife? Be a shame if something happened to her. Nathan's blood turned to ice. You touch her, and I'll kill you slow. Big words from a dead man. Holden raised his hand, and his men reached for their weapons. I gave you a chance, Whitaker. Remember that when you're burning in hell. The first shot came from Ellie in the loft, her rifle cracking like thunder. One of Holden's men toppled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Then the world exploded into violence. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Windows shattered, wood splintered, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood. Nathan dove behind an overturned table, pulling Ruby down beside him as bullets whined overhead. Stay down, he shouted over the chaos, but Ruby was no longer the frightened girl who'd appeared at his door. Her eyes had taken on that otherworldly quality again, and she seemed to be listening to voices only she could hear. Lincoln's hurt, she said with eerie calm. Shot in the leg. But he'll keep fighting. Camila's run out of ammunition. She needs to fall back to the kitchen. Nathan stared at her in amazement. Somehow, she was seeing the entire battle unfold as if from above. How do you, Leo, she said simply. He's watching over all of us. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Nathan lost count of the shots fired, the men who fell on both sides. Through it all, Ruby remained beside him, calling out warnings and guidance with supernatural precision. Then, suddenly, the gunfire slowed. Holden's voice cut through the smoke and chaos, filled with rage and disbelief. Fall back! Fall back, damn you! Nathan risked a look over his barricade. Half of Holden's men were down, dead or wounded. The survivors were retreating in disorder, their confidence shattered by the fierce resistance they'd encountered, but Holden himself wasn't finished. The big man had dismounted and was stalking toward the house, his twin pistols drawn, murder in his eyes. "This isn't over, Whitaker," he roared. "I'll burn everything you love before I'm done." As Holden kicked open the front door and stepped into the house with death in his hands, Nathan realized that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose. Asher Holden filled the doorway like a harbinger of death, his twin Colts gleaming in the smoky air. Blood streaked his face from a grazing bullet, and his silver hair was wild with rage. Behind him, the sounds of his retreating men faded into the distance, leaving only the deadly silence between predator and prey. 30 years I've been taking what I want in this territory, Holden snarled, his eyes fixed on Nathan. "And no broken-down rancher and his ragtag friends are going to stop me now." Nathan rose slowly from behind the overturned table, his rifle steady in his hands. "It's over, Holden. Your men are scattered. Ride out while you still can." Holden's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, it's over, all right. But not the way you think." His gaze shifted to Ruby, who stood beside Nathan with surprising calm. "See, I've learned something about you, Whitaker. You've got a weakness now. Something to lose." "Don't," Nathan warned, his voice deadly quiet. "Pretty little thing, isn't she? Wonder how she'll look with a bullet in her belly." Holden raised his left pistol toward Ruby. Time slowed to honey-thick seconds. Nathan saw the killer's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Ruby's green eyes widen not with fear, but with strange acceptance. But as Holden's gun roared, Ruby moved with impossible speed, throwing herself sideways. The bullet meant for her heart caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the floor hard, crimson spreading across Sarah's blue dress like spilled. Nathan's world went red. With a roar of pure rage, he charged forward, his rifle forgotten. Holden swung both guns toward him, but Nathan was beyond caring about his own safety. All that mattered was the woman bleeding on his floor, the woman who'd brought light back into his darkness. They collided like forces of nature. Nathan's shoulder drove into Holden's chest, sending them both crashing into the wooden table. Holden's guns went flying as they rolled across the floor, each man fighting for dominance with the desperate strength of those who know death is watching. Holden was larger, stronger, but Nathan fought with the fury of a man protecting everything he loved. They exchanged bone-jarring blows, their grunts and curses echoing in the smoky room. "You should have taken my offer," Holden gasped, wrapping his massive hands around Nathan's throat. "Now I'll kill everyone you care about, starting with that witch." Nathan's vision began to darken as Holden's grip tightened. But through the roaring in his ears, he heard Ruby's voice, weak but clear. "Nathan," the fire poker, by the hearth. With his last strength, Nathan reached out blindly. His fingers closed around cold iron. In one fluid motion, he swung the poker with everything he had left. It caught Holden across the temple with a sound like a hammer striking meat. Holden's eyes went wide with surprise, then empty. He toppled backward, his massive frame hitting the floor with a final, thunderous crash. Nathan crawled to Ruby's side, his hands shaking as he examined her wound. The bullet had passed through her shoulder cleanly, missing the major arteries. She was pale but alive, her eyes bright with pain and something else, triumph. "It's finished," she whispered. Leo says his pa can stop carrying the guilt now. He's proud of the man you've become." Nathan pressed his hand to her wound, trying to stem the bleeding. "Don't talk. Save your strength." "No, I need to tell you. The vision, the one he showed me." Ruby's hand found his cheek, her touch gentle despite her pain. "It wasn't just a possibility, Nathan. It was a promise. We're going to have that life. That family." Through the broken windows, Nathan could hear the voices of his friends, calling out to ensure everyone was safe. Luna's voice, strong and commanding. Lincoln's gruff reassurance. The Madison brothers checking the perimeter. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd stood together and won. But as Nathan looked down at Ruby's pale face, he realized the real victory wasn't defeating Holden. It was finding the courage to love again, to hope again, to believe that broken hearts could heal and dead dreams could bloom a new point. 3 months later, Nathan stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch had been rebuilt, stronger than before. The seven who'd stood together that terrible day had become a family of choice, bound by shared danger and mutual respect. Ruby emerged from the house, her arm still in a sling, but her smile bright as summer sunshine. In her free hand, she carried a letter that had arrived with the evening mail. "It's from the territorial governor," she said, settling beside him on the porch swing he'd built during her recovery. "Official recognition of our actions against the Holden gang. And a reward, enough to expand the ranch, maybe hire some hands." Nathan took the letter but didn't read it. His attention was entirely focused on the woman beside him, on the way. The evening light caught the auburn fire in her hair. "Ruby," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him with those impossibly green eyes. "What is it?" "I love you." The words came out rough, unpracticed, but honest as sunrise. "I know it's been fast. I know it's complicated with everything that's happened, Nathan." Ruby's fingers pressed gently against his lips. "I love you too. Have since that first night when you took in a half-frozen stranger without question." He captured her hand in his, marveling at how perfectly it fit. Leo was right, wasn't he? About the vision. About our future. Ruby's smile could have lit the whole territory. "Look around you. Really look." Nathan followed her gaze across the ranch yard. Luna was teaching young Ellie to rope calves while the Madison brothers looked on with amusement. Camila was hanging laundry on the line she'd insisted they install, her laughter ringing across the yard as Lincoln told one of his endless stories. It was already a family, already the beginning of something beautiful. "The dead don't lie," Ruby said softly. "Leo saw what was possible if we had the courage to reach for it. And we did." Nathan pulled her close, careful of her injured shoulder. "So what happens now?" "Now we build that life he showed me. Together." Ruby's eyes took on that otherworldly quality one last time. "And Nathan?" "Leo says goodbye. He says he can rest now, knowing his pa has found happiness again." Nathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd carried for 3 long years. In the distance, a mockingbird began to sing, the same song Sarah used to hum, and he could swear he heard 2 voices in the melody, his beloved wife and his precious son, giving their blessing to the new chapter about to begin. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Nathan Whitaker realized that sometimes the greatest miracles arrive in the form of strangers at the door, carrying impossible stories and the promise of love reborn. The ranch settled into peaceful quiet, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the gentle hush of contentment, of souls finding their way home at last. In the garden behind the house, Sarah's rosebush, barren for 3 years, burst into sudden, impossible bloom. Well now, friends, that's a tale worth telling twice and remembering thrice. Sometimes love finds us when we least expect it, and sometimes the dead have more wisdom than the living. If this story stirred something in your heart, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and redemption from the Wild West. Now tell me, where are you watching from today? I love hearing from folks all across this great wide world of ours.